Okay, the door is closed, and it looks like we're all ready to take a deep dive into a session that, candidly, I've been thinking about for quite some time. I have the good fortune of going from location to location on the outreach side of the Community Development Department of the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland. I have the good fortune of going throughout western Pennsylvania, largely the northern panhandle of West Virginia and southeast Ohio, to meet with organizations. And I get to see a lot of initiatives, a lot of programmatic activities, learn about a lot of great things. And I've noticed that there is a new paradigm taking hold ever since the Great Recession took hold, and we're moving out of that. And I thought it would be interesting for us to kind of explore this new paradigm and the reasons why this shift is taking place, what are the components of this shift, and then get some examples of what this shift looks like in reality. So my name is Joe Ott. I'm going to be serving as your moderator for today's panel. And I would like to introduce three folks that candidly left me with my jaw askew at the end of our planning call, because I was so amazed at their breadth of knowledge and what they were doing that I had never thought that some of these initiatives were possible. So I was impressed, and it wasn't that it was a lack of good work by the individuals, but I scratched my head a couple of times and I said, that's really, really intriguing, and I'm very, very glad to have them on our panel today. So to my immediate left is Georgia Petropoulos from Oakland Business Development District, Salem Reiner from Johns Hopkins University, and Sam Bressi from Lancaster County Community Foundation. On the western part of the state, or in the western part of the state, we say Lancaster. I'm from Pittsburgh, and you'll hear a little bit of Pittsburgh ease come out, but I know it's Lancaster. I'm sorry?
We will correct you.
Please. I said Lancaster first, so we are in good shape.
Not Breezy.
Right. So as I had said, the new paradigm that is taking hold is really intriguing to me. I think back to when I started in community development, and I remember in a lot of instances, community-based organizations were largely volunteer. And they were meeting in the basements of churches. They were meeting in community centers. And it wasn't until some years later that we started to see the career field professionalize. And we saw paid staffers emerge, and we saw, in effect, the career field take root in a largely different light. And I think that has a lot to do with what we were able to accomplish, because in effect people were holding full-time jobs, doing their volunteer activities on the side, but with the advent of paid staff, we were able to take community development to that next level. So I see this new paradigm shift taking hold now as kind of the next evolution, or the 2.0 for community development. So the new partners, new roles, they could largely be a function of the fiscal realities that we're all facing, but I think that it's more has to do with us working smarter. So working across those columns, those silos, and saying, hey, you're doing this work over here, I'm doing this work here, how can we complement one another? And that is the story that I hope to gather from our panelists today. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to speak for about 10 to 15 minutes to set the stage. Then I'm going to lead a moderated discussion in which I put our panelists not in the hot seat, but put them in a position to ask or answer some follow-up questions. And then for the last half hour of our session, I'm coming to you all, and I'm actually going to be facilitating a discussion between between our attendees, between you all, and our panel today. So I will actually take a handheld mic. We'll call this the unsession, and I will take the handheld mic to you, and we're going to tease out some of the ideas that we had heard presented with some of the local input that you all will be able to offer. So I'm going to go ahead and cut my remarks off here and turn it over to, I'm not sure if we actually determined who wanted to go first.
He did.
Rock, paper, scissors?
Rock, paper, scissors works for me. How about we just go from right to left? So Georgia, do you want to kick the remarks off? Thank you. Georgia and I, by the way, go way back. She's someone that works 5 minutes up the road, and I get to see the good work that she's doing. So very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, everyone. Good morning. I'm going to keep my watch here because I know that Joe has us on. Oh, let's see. So, Joe, I have a PowerPoint somewhere here. Let's see. Is this me?
My goal is to help you find it.
That's it. Don't know where it is. That's not it.
Can we just click on the name, maybe?
Ah, there we go.
Does that pop up?
Let's see.
Maybe our esteemed Philadelphia friends can help us out.
Sorry.
Sorry. You don't want to not.
And by the way, I represent the Oakland neighborhood in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, not Oakland, California. So I can't tell you. At least 5 times a year, I get a phone call. Person talking to someone in California, and I say, I wish, especially when it's February and they're calling me. Sorry, can you all hear me? Just want to make sure that everyone can hear me in the back. So, new partners, new roles. Well, I'm here to talk about a new age, and definitely a new age for the city I live in, which is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. A new age for us all, for the globe. But I'm pretty proud to talk about sort of where we are right now as Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So, I didn't tout the term comeback city. That was actually Forbes magazine. So our city's been getting an enormous amount of accolades, which is wonderful. So, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Steel Town Central in the 20th century. For those of you that come from Rust Belt cities, you can relate with me in terms of what my city went through. I'll give you just one statistic that sort of puts it all in breath. When the steel industry left, 60s and 70s, we had an amazing downturn. We hit rock bottom. We had almost close to 18% unemployment 30 years ago. We should have rioted the streets like the Greeks did last year, but it was pretty bad. And I remember that time. I remember that city. So to be here today, to have all these accolades, to have these top national agencies sort of giving you these amazing metrics in terms of where you are today is fantastic. So yes, we are the comeback city. In fact, our unemployment, by the way, is hovering close to 3 to 4%, which is pretty good in terms of the national average, as you see here. We're being ranked as top fastest growing startup hub, which is amazing. I'll talk a little bit more about that coming down. We are the comeback city, best for jobs in top 10. Who would have thought Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania would be in this position? Most resilient city, President Obama has been to our city, met multiple times to show us off as well as to see this is what happens. This is an American city that's on a comeback. So you may have seen some of the accolades. The one I had to put in there, by the way, it's good when the Huffington Post tells you have the best cake. That is definitely, you've made it to the top. Well, I'm here to tell you that the primary reason, in my opinion, why Pittsburgh, of course, has come back in the last few decades. There's multiple reasons and multiple leadership decisions that have been made. But what we're calling our anchor district community, which is Oakland, and that's our anchors, and that's our eds and meds. This has been the push of what's brought Pittsburgh back on the map. So we are home to the University of Pittsburgh, to Carnegie Mellon University, Duquesne University, Carlow University, Chatham University. I can go on. We are definitely Western Pennsylvania's hotbed in terms of the eds and meds. Philadelphia probably rivals us in terms of size. We are the 3rd largest downtown center. And I'd like to catch up on that term, downtown. You remember in the 20th century, your main employment centers were called CBDs, Central Business Districts, downtowns. They were your corporate centers. So In Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that central business district downtown, which is the second largest economic center, was the home to U.S. Steel. And that, by the way, is their tower that was built, the USX Tower, which is the tallest building in downtown Pittsburgh. It's quite fantastic that now it's the corporate center for UPMC, which is our hospital system, which, by the way, is the majority housed in Oakland. But it's telling between centuries. In the 20th century, that was steel. In the 21st century, now we're talking the new anchors. This is the health center. This is the health system. This is what's bringing Pittsburgh back, and this is what our major employers are. So you can see the local impact of what we're calling anchor districts, or how the eds and meds are moving in terms of they're becoming one of the country's largest employers. They are located, obviously, in major cities across the United States. And the impact is astounding. So locally, what they've done is pretty impressive. They're the region's largest employers. 22% of the total region is employed by the eds and meds. UPMC is the #1 employer. University of Pittsburgh is #4. That's in the top 10 in terms of pieces. On a national scale, you can see just some of the pieces there with how the eds and meds are moving. 5% of U.S. jobs, 11% in major cities. They're a major force. And the other thing I just wanted to add, too, since I'm here at a Federal Reserve Fund project, we have to talk about the Feds, which is great. University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon University, by the way, they sort of go between the two, have been in the top 5 and top 10 rankings for the last decade in terms of the amount of federal research dollars that comes into the city. That's incredible, and that's huge. So medical research, and then robotics and sort of life sciences and high tech, so 2 big industries that are growing right now. And a big piece of that is because of the research dollars that comes into the city of Pittsburgh. So my organization is a business improvement district, BIDS. How many people in here have ever heard of BIDS? No, BIDS are, wow, great, I don't have to tell you what it is. That's fantastic. Yes, so it's an economic model. It's a public-private partnership model that was designed to organize property and business owners in traditional city business districts back in the 60s and 70s, when a lot of our business districts died off because they were competing with the suburbs. They were competing with the mall. So bids are very much based on a mall model, where you have a collective pot of funds that everybody contributes towards. And in the case of a business improvement district, they're usually A, mandatory, B, they're based on property tax value. It's an assessment that comes through, land and building value. And with these funds, you provide the kinds of services that a mall manager provides: beautification, cleanliness, promotion and marketing, events, that type of thing. So what's interesting about my bid, it was formed in 1999. I was not there during its formation, but the biggest supporters and the people who helped organize the private market in the business district was actually the anchors, the eds and meds. In the late 80s, early 90s, this area of Oakland was, Joe, if you remember it, pretty gritty, pretty grimy. This was supposed to be the front door to the universities and the hospitals. It was full of graffiti. It was dirty. Had about almost 15% vacancy rate. 10% is healthy, but for a place outside of your major employers to have that much vacancy was not good. Home to a lot of nightclubs, which I frequented in the early 80s, so I contributed to the problem. But if you're a university, you don't want problem bars in your business district. You don't want tenants that are selling tobacco products. I'm going to put that in quotes. So it was a problem, right? Because now it's a business model, and you're going to hear more of it from my colleagues here talking about, the eds and meds are competing too. You can send your kids, or you yourselves could have chosen to go to quite a few different universities across the United States, let alone across the world. What would make you want to come to the University of Pittsburgh or Carnegie Mellon? Place begins to matter in the decision of the consumer and the customer. Same with hospitals. Of course, when you're in an ambulance, you might not have time to choose, but you really can. Now it's at the point where hospitals are competing with each other in terms of trying to get that customer and luring it in. So place matters from a business perspective. So it's no surprise that the health system and the universities organized this bid, because they said, we got to clean up this act. And it was fantastic. So they are a member. I have over 250 to 300 member property and business owners. Pitt and UPMC both own property in my business district, so they both contribute towards the bid. So about half of our budget comes from the property tax assessments, and then another third actually does come from the eds and meds specifically. It's a contribution that they give us in lieu of an assessment. So it's a very active group. Again, this is sort of the maintenance organization, and it provides a variety of different services. I talked a little bit about the kinds of services that we do in the business district, which wouldn't surprise me if this business, I'm sure this business district, by the way, that we're in is managed by a bid. It's clean. I went out this morning. It was litter-free. There's plantings. There's flower baskets. I'm sure there's a swath of events that happen here. So we do a variety of different things, and I'm going to call this the maintenance model. This really was the 20th century. There's over 1,000 bids in the United States. They're formed in major cities, mostly in downtown centers. It's rare that they're formed outside of the, shall I say, eds and meds districts, but that's changing, because as I'm saying, we're becoming the new downtown of the 21st century. So the neighborhood of Oakland has many challenges. So, I have a 4-lane highway running through my business district. There's almost 50,000 cars daily. City of Pittsburgh's major highway systems can get up to 80,000 cars. So that's a lot of cars for an area that's supposed to be encouraging pedestrian activity and retail. But we have a big hospital and big university system in our backyard. We don't have much of an identity. We can be known as the anchor district. We can be known as the eds and meds. We can be known as the campus area. But if you're trying to really promote the neighborhood, there really isn't much of a sexy identity, I guess, to attract customers. We have very little green space. So you can see that, we're definitely clustered with challenges. And it needs more homeowners. We have a lot of, for those of you that work in neighborhoods outside of campus districts, you have a lot of transient populations, which is good, but we have a neighborhood that also would like to see more permanent residents and more homeowners. And how do you do that? So a couple projects that I just wanted to talk about briefly today is the interesting thing that's happening with business improvement districts is now as we're moving into the new century, they're going from just being maintenance-based organizations or doing a maintenance model to now they're moving into being visionary organizations. Now they're actually trying to change their infrastructures and the look of their communities and their districts. And the eds and meds in my backyard are contributing towards this, and they're actually pushing this along with the local government systems. So we created a couple projects, and I'll just briefly touch on them. We created what we're calling Innovation Oakland, which is an infrastructure project that we want to build. And the whole point is, if my backyard is known for its research and its innovation, you wouldn't know it walking the streets. We should be using new materials in our sidewalks and our streets. Concrete's a 2,000-year-old material. The Romans used it. Our light poles shouldn't be wired anymore. They really should be wireless. They really should reflect the movement of the sun. Banners can be digital. There's just an enormous amount of stuff, because that's where the future is going. And the millennials, you've all heard, they're about to become the largest population in America after the boomers. So we're eds and meds. This is the backyard. We have to make sure that we look attractive for the new generation, and we work with the new generation. So just you can see some of the differences that I put here in terms of the two different populations. And of course, the trends. We've heard about a lot of trends that have been happening here. I think the two biggest things I just want to highlight here, obviously, the Gen Y, the rise of the Gen Y population, and what kind of infrastructure are they going to want. And then the second, this new thing you may or may not have heard is the term the digital divide. So we still have 1 out of every 5 adults in the United States that don't have access to new technology or ability to use it. Imagine if it was part of their public right away. Imagine if just everything you did as you're sort of experiencing the public sector allows you to sort of touch into new technology systems. So here are some cities that are we looked at precedent that's doing this, which we're really proud of. New York City being one, which has done some pretty amazing things. They changed all their phone booths now into touchscreen systems. We have big goals, and I'll just quickly go through this. We just want to make sure we have an infrastructure that reflects the city of innovation, right? That's what we're known for. So the big reason why I'm bringing up this project is this is heavily funded by the eds and meds. They funded the planning. We finished the construction documents and design from one of our first projects. Here are the partners on this project. It's not just the city government. It's my universities, it's my hospital systems, and multiple other nonprofit agencies, transportation agencies as well. So you got a bunch of new players sitting around the table saying we have to rebuild our infrastructure and rethink what our city looks like. And first and foremost, we have to do it in Oakland. So we came up with a series of outcomes, again, continuing with some precedent, just trying to show you some images. We've already raised over $1 million, both in in-kind as well as cash, for the planning and the actual implementation of various projects that we've done. We've completed a master plan. We've done an extensive series of projects to sort of showcase what we mean when we say we want to be a digital community. So I'm just going to run through this really quickly. This is our first project we want to get off the ground this year, first construction project. There's this thing called static wayfinding, and then there's this thing called digital wayfinding in terms of signs that can move and that can provide you instant real-time information, keeping up with the new century. And then just, I mean, you know, we even have navigation tools that are being developed by researchers at Carnegie Mellon and Pitt together for navigation for the visually and hearing impaired. It's just a whole new sort of breadth. Imagine having an infrastructure that responds 100% accessible to everyone in terms of navigation and wayfinding. So we're pretty excited about some of the projects that are coming out. And I'll just go to one last one piece here. And then the final piece is, so this is sort of a business development, economic development project called Startup Oakland. So this is also a public-private partnership where I have my largest for-profit property owner that has a series of turn-of-the-century buildings left in the business district. All the upper floors of their buildings were vacant, almost close to 15,000 square feet spread between 6 or 10 buildings. And lo and behold, when they, you know, here we are developing an infrastructure project that's digital-based. Here they are saying we want to start a co-working tech space, which they did. They created Rev Oakland, which is a for-profit LLC co-working space for startup companies. And the beautiful thing is, it's because they're in the backyard of the eds and meds. We've already attracted over 20 companies, created 75 jobs. Our goal is 100 companies, and we couldn't do this without our partners. So that's really the big piece that I wanted to end on in terms of a series of different projects that talks about these new partners, new roles, and trying to create the sort of new city of the 21st century. All right, thank you.
All right, you can help me with this technology?
Nice job.
Thank you.
Next.
It'll make up for my
Escape.
Stop it. I just prepared my presentation.
How many people does it take to get a PowerPoint?
Just click.
What's that?
Even if it's in front of you, we're not going to.
Yeah.
Thank you. This is what anchor institutions are about. It's about collaboration. Literally and figuratively. So again, my name is Salem Reiner. I'm with Johns Hopkins University, and I'll start out by saying there's an S on the Johns. It's part of collaboration is knowing who your partners are, and while the institution, we need to understand who we are internally, external parties need to understand us. So I'm going to move through this fairly quickly. Well, let me start out by putting anchor institutions into context. Really, there are 5 kind of general components that create an anchor institution. They're highly unlikely to relocate. They have a substantial impact on their surroundings. They'll have a deliberate strategy regarding their off-campus, off-site engagement. They're going to dedicate resources, that is, putting skin in the game. And their anchor institutions or their strategies are collaboratively driven. So in the case of Johns Hopkins, it's the largest private employer in Baltimore City and the state of Maryland. Incidentally, the second largest private employer in Maryland is Walmart. Hopkins has about 40-some thousand in Maryland. Walmart has about 17,000. In Baltimore City, the city created about 6,500 jobs between 2009 and 2013. Of those, a little over 2,100 came from Johns Hopkins. And also, just to put it into context, when Bethlehem Steel, which was headquartered in Baltimore City, was at their prime, they had about 36,000 employees in Baltimore City. That's about the number where Johns Hopkins is right now. So there's been a major shift in terms of the role, about what the role of anchor institutions such as Johns Hopkins play. And anchor institutions grew out of the prominence in the decline of manufacturing, loss of private sector headquarters, loss of federal funding in urban areas. And as those assets, those resources, those opportunities departed, anchors stepped into this void, some by choice, some out of crisis. But what distinguishes, or the driving force behind anchor institutions' agendas and initiatives, is that it's business driven. That is, that there's an interest in a return on investment. And this is said openly, publicly. It's not a bad thing that there's a business model being used. It's important at a university to distinguish the anchor institution role from the civic, philanthropic, scholarly, student-driven initiatives, which also support and help off-campus issues, but are typically done on what I'd call on an ad hoc, individual basis, and are not driven by a larger strategy. So, looking at Johns Hopkins, the reason that what's driving the interest in investing locally is, again, it's about our business relations. How does the surrounding impact us? Just as you heard before, the eds and meds in Pittsburgh have an interest in their surroundings. For Hopkins, that's also the case. Off-campus issues affect the business operations of the university, and there are lots of telling factors, but one that we found, being that we're a research university, we look at a lot of data-driven topics, and we found that one of the primary reasons that students, get this right, that are accepted to Johns Hopkins University but choose to go elsewhere is because of our surroundings. It's not because of the academics, it's not because of the cost. It's when you compare Baltimore with whether it's Penn or Berkeley or London, etc., that surrounding ends up impacting how we're able to attract and retain the best and the brightest, whether it's students, whether it's faculty, staff, researchers, etc. So at Johns Hopkins, the primary anchor institution strategy that I'm going to talk about, we have three, is called the Homewood Community Partners Initiative. And this grew out of a greater understanding that the health and well-being of the university's main undergraduate student campus, called Homewood, is inextricably tied to the physical, social, and economic well-being of the surrounding neighborhoods. And that was understood very early on. Hopkins was established in 1876. There was an understanding then that surroundings impact the operations. But that's very different from now, when people and information and resources become very, very mobile. Working the way through to develop this strategy took years. I've been at Hopkins since late 2001, and even at that time, there was discussion, well, how do we manage our off-campus relations? So it took a long time and a deliberate process. So for Johns Hopkins, looking at how it can play a role as an anchor institution, some of it is organic. It happens naturally. We buy things locally. We hire locally. We have capital projects that are off campus. And some of it is very deliberate. So this circle of the role of an anchor, I have Johns Hopkins there, but really if you look at just about any major anchor institution, they're going to be very, very similar to these roles. And it's how we go about applying these. And what's important, again, looking at the anchor institution strategy and thinking about developing those processes, is where there's a vested interest. The only way that the institution is really going to have what I call a significant or profound impact on surroundings is when it has its skin in the game, when it matters. If we're building a building and it's off campus, we're concerned about what happens in the surrounding area. So how do we apply very deliberately these particular actions to move off-campus agenda forward? And what's also critical is that as the anchor institution strategy develops, that it's done collaboratively. And collaboration is not always an easy process, as anyone who's tried it has known. Never mind when you take a large, conservative, research-oriented higher education institution and a very grassroots organization. There's a huge gulf that's there. How do you bridge that gulf? How do you bridge that gulf there and start developing a strategy? And within the anchor institution strategy, it's about where are, at least at a macro level, where are our interests similar? How can we work together to bring those forward? So our president came on board, and he had three primary goals for his administration. Two of them related something about research and academics. I'm not paid to remember that part. My part was the third that he said was, how do we engage locally? And this was the first time in the university's history that this said, we're bringing this up to the leadership level. While previously it certainly had been talked about and actions had happened, but it was on isolated causes. And to be very blunt, it was when there was a issue that pushed the university to deal with it. Here's a piece of legislation. We have something happening in the community. We have a PR issue. Whatever it is, we have a piece of government legislation, something's happening in the community. We do it then. What changed was a president who said, this is critical to our operations, our business interests. And that enabled a long-term, robust engagement, both within the university and with our partners, who I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. The other point that I'd like to mention is, before I came to Hopkins, I spent over 15 years working in and for government and developers. I worked, probably in 20 different government organizations nationally. I thought I was well prepared for process. A university has more process than any government I've ever worked in. I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, certainly there are very complex issues in government. I'm not diminishing that issue. But almost all research universities are highly, highly decentralized. So just because the president says, we are going to do X, it's the person at the division, school, unit, office, lab level who's making that decision. So when thinking about how do you put together, it's great that the president says, this is what we're going to do. I'm a direct report to the president. I get all this political firepower behind me. But talking to a dean, talking to a researcher, talking to a faculty member, talking to our facilities people, it's making that argument and getting them to get the buy-in and having strong partners to work with that are in the community to move this piece forward. Most, if not all, anchor institution strategies have, when I came up with the list, there was something like 30 that I came up with. What are the ingredients? But really, when I looked at it, there are 8. They're going to give and take on any particular anchor. But there are a few critical pieces. And this is the first one, the aha piece. Sometimes it's literally a moment. I went to Penn, and they're probably the standard that everybody refers to. And really what started their anchor institution strategy was some really horrific issues that happened off campus. Affiliates being murdered and blight, et cetera, et cetera. And they had a president, Judith Rodin, who said, this is intolerable. We're going to move based on these particular issues. Hopkins, we're late coming to this anchor or deliberate anchor institution game, but we're very fortunate in that we were able to be more proactive about it. I mean, we have off-campus issues that absolutely must be addressed, but we had what I'd call the multiple year process. I'm getting to 5-minute slides, so I need to move on. Okay, so here you have these issues. We created a program called an HCP, the Homo Community Partners Initiative. And first we got this buy-in. Then we hired a fantastic consultant, Joe McNeely, who runs the Central Baltimore Partnership, to look at putting together, and this was done in a very sunshine way, a third party to put together what's the collective agenda, what's our agenda, and how does that relate to our off-campus agenda. We also worked with several nonprofits, including the Greater Homo Community Corporation, that had wonderful relationships on the ground to move this forward and identify this agenda. So I'm going to start moving really fast so I don't get the 2-minute and the red light thing. But we came up with a report, and we deliberately said we are not creating a new organization. We're creating an agenda based off of existing interests and plans to move, to identify what the goals are, and then to collectively put together the agenda. The Homo Community Partners Initiative is 10 neighborhoods, 1 commercial district, that goes beyond the conventional borders because we realized collectively, we, the community in Hopkins, to address issues, housing, schools, safety, public infrastructure, it's not on a neighborhood-by-neighborhood basis. The vision has these 3 components to it. And what's interesting, even though they're low-income neighborhoods, very strong middle and upper-income neighborhoods, the collective agenda was let's bring in middle-income families that can buy market-rate housing while not creating displacement. Out of that process, we came with 29 very specific recommendations built off a strategy. Each one of those 29 programs has a specific strategy as a starting point to move forward with. There's a federation. There are about 60-some organizations, parties within the HCPI program area. We're working right now with about 30 of them through the Central Baltimore Partnership, which is a governance agency. It does not generally deliver the programs. They work with existing organizations to deliver those. And then what we're doing, we're at the grassroots level, working in schools, community centers, moving projects forward with our, on the university side, because with the university we have political connections, we can write checks, we can help move agenda forward, but again, it's through a collaborative approach. We're hiring and buying more locally. We're creating a $30 million development and acquisition fund to make sure that no project that required just some relatively small amount of capital that's important to the project initiative, make sure that moves forward. The university runs a number of housing programs to incentivize employees and others to buy in the neighborhood. We're working to improve two local schools, city schools, which is probably the most important part. If you have strong schools, there's all sorts of spin-off that happens. And by the way, all these programs are interconnected. We're looking about moving projects for the first time, university operations off-site. There are two, what I'd call deteriorated and vacant, but historic and important theaters located about 8 blocks south of the campus in an arts district. We are in conjunction, Hopkins in conjunction with the Maryland Institute College of Art and several others, are moving programming into these two theaters with the Maryland Film Festival. This brings activity to the area. And by the way, we just signed, for those of you, actually, I think everybody in this room, or almost everybody, except I'm looking at two people from Baltimore who won't necessarily know, Thomas Dolby, who you remember Blinded by Science. We just signed him to open a music and technology lab that's going to go in here. It's this really cool dynamic to work with the local indigenous arts community. Our president met with a major property owner who was sitting on property for 20 years who did not move it forward. He met with this individual, and in 1 minute I'm going to conclude. I see the sign. Which he, using our president's presence to meet with this individual and to explain what we were looking to do, he is now on board. A week later, he sends his developer to meet with us, and we're moving forward on a major project there. The university has dedicated $10 million over 5 years. We've put $2 million cash in. We've leveraged $12 million net new cash. Important to recognize that this is cash that's not competitive with our existing local nonprofits. And to show that this is working independently of what the university is doing, there are a variety of projects that are moving forward, from in the schools to the Central Baltimore Partnership, which is working with parties to move the agenda forward, private investment, etc. 3 seconds left. Stop. Okay.
I appreciate, Salem, the absence of the shepherd's crook, so we can stay on schedule. All right. You do not have a presentation.
Technology is easy when you don't bring slides. You'll have to look at me. I apologize in advance. I'm Sam Bressi, CEO of Lancaster County Community Foundation. When we had the call scheduled, when we got on the call, I said, I'm not economic development. I'm not an expert in this, and obviously we have two people who are deeply involved. I'm much broader than that. As a community foundation, we're community builders. Joe assured me that I could contribute something of value to this conversation, and I hope that I do. The most important part for me of the call was that I found out on the call that this session was on Tuesday and not on Monday, because I had it on my calendar and I would have been here a day early. And that goes to my situation in life, and I'll share with you. On Saturday, my baby girl gets married. I'm in two places right now mentally at once. I've been received the clear instructions that when I arrive on Saturday, I am to show up, shut up, and pay up. So Lancaster County and the city of Lancaster, it's kind of it's interesting as an outsider from the community. As I looked and I viewed Lancaster County, what I thought of was Amish, the Amish country, farmland, beautiful countryside, and that is in fact a piece of what Lancaster County has to offer, and it's worth visiting just for that. But it's a small sliver of the community, and I want to just paint a little better picture of the community as I know it in the 6 years that I've been running the community foundation there. Basically, the Amish, big part of that culture, farmland. We're the first county in the nation to preserve 100,000 acres of farmland. That's really valuable because it provides the context and the fabric of what Lancaster County has to offer. That's a lot different, a little different than most, and makes it unique. It's a historical center as well, a hub of the Underground Railroad. It's home to Central Market, the oldest, it's a historic site, oldest continually operating farmers market right in the heart of downtown. You almost have, when you come into Lancaster too, you have to explore the alleyways because the farmers market isn't readily apparent or visible from the main streets. You have to kind of wander around and explore it by foot. It's very interesting to do that. The Fulton Theater, another historic landmark right on Prince Street, and the James Buchanan House, one of our former presidents. You know, if you're going to be like a president and you're going to be ranked, you know, if you're not number one or number two, you might as well be the worst. And James Buchanan is widely recognized in history as the worst president this country has ever had. And he's from Lancaster, and we have his house. So come and visit it. No comment. Well, we did have Thaddeus Stevens on the other side of that debate, and if you've seen the movie Lincoln, you can get a sense of where Thaddeus Stevens was in history. And again, right from Lancaster County, and you can see his some historic landmarks there with his name as well. What you probably don't know about Lancaster, because I didn't know, is there's actually a city there. There's an urban core that for decades had been blighted and had deteriorated and had just been on a downward slide. And I arrived, fortunately, I think, just as traction was building. And a lot of good things have been happening in the downtown. And I'll just point out, just countywide, you probably have, if you've gone to a concert or a national, a political campaign, one of their programs, even like an auto show display, you've probably seen Lancaster County products in action. Lancaster County Lidditz, PA is home to Tate Towers, Claire Global, and Atomic Design. They literally do the vast majority of concert productions all over the world. They're the largest producer of sound, staging, lighting of concerts, and most people don't know that. I've walked by a place, there's a little place called Annie Ann's, and they have a building on Prince Street, their headquarters, and they've recently been sold, but they have an office in there of a group that I walked by and I wasn't aware until 2 weeks ago, and I met Bill Spire. He has Aspire, a company that is a venture capital and foundation firm. They're doing back office, venture capital investment and tech entrepreneurs right in Lancaster, working globally. They actually have a product right now that's monitoring childhood diabetes. It's biometrics. Put a wristband on. It sends signals to the cloud. Doctors can monitor and track a patient's biometrics. Those data are shared on the cloud so that refinements can be made in treatment of childhood diabetes. This is one of their hundreds of products, and it's right there in Lancaster. And the reason they're in Lancaster is, one, Bill Spire grew up in Lancaster County. He came back. He's bringing folks from all over the world, and they're wanting to stay. And so he's building his corporate hub. You know, I've often said, if you want to be in Philadelphia, I love Philadelphia, and I love Pittsburgh, and I actually love Baltimore as well. If you want to be in one of those settings, we have great cities in Pennsylvania and Maryland that you can choose from. But if you don't want to be in the center of a large urban setting like Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, or Baltimore, Lancaster County has a very unique blend of both farmland country and an urban atmosphere. So I'd encourage you to take that 1 hour and 5 minute train ride on Amtrak for $16 to visit for a day or for a weekend at any point. It's a great place to see. So what do I do? That was my question when I got on the phone call. What do I do? I think I'm blessed as a funder, as the CEO of a community foundation. We're about an $85 million community foundation, so we're very small. We do about $3 million of grants every year. and we have a program that does another $3 million. So we have about $6 million of impact. Bless you. And when I arrived 6 years ago at the Community Foundation, when we were turning down 7 requests for every one that we were able to accept, I fundamentally saw the need to be more than just dollars. And so the Community Foundation, as small as we are in a small city setting in Lancaster County, we've really taken a very, I think, forward-thinking approach to our work. Really dealing in 3 key areas. One is providing stewardship like community foundations do, doing great grant making, but also community connections, reaching out, really pushing our community to collaborate, bringing people together, convening, looking for creative ways to put minds in a room so that different perspectives are coming around challenging issues and opportunities in our community. And that issues versus opportunities, I think, is a fundamental difference from our approach as a community foundation to what I've seen nationally. And a lot of community foundations and funders in general fund programs. They want you to show them metrics. It's basically they don't want to spend any money on overhead. It's all about programs, show us the numbers and the impact, and prove it to us. We've looked, again, around solving problems. We've kind of flipped that on its head a bit. And what we've been trying to do in Lancaster County is we've been looking for those unique opportunities that our county has. And we've been trying to leverage those opportunities. And yes, we have an application process. And yes, we have metrics to measure. But what we've shifted to is we've shifted to a focus on innovation. Our belief is that what's worked over the last 20 years, what's made us successful in the last 2 decades will not necessarily make us successful in the next decade. Part of that work is wrapped around the city. It's where we're located, and we believe that the urban core is fundamental and vital to the success of our entire community. We're blessed with some things that have happened prior to my arrival at the Community Foundation. One was a program called the Lancaster Alliance and JSID, where we were already collaborating. We had Lancaster General Hospital and F&M, 2 of the anchor organizations in our communities, plugged in to actually work collaboratively, bringing others to the table around the future of Lancaster County and how to invest to get there. So having a plan is really important in achieving anything. There was also something that was happening that on the surface looked awful for the community, but I believe as I look and reflect on it, it's really provided an element to our community that's begun to make us unique. And that was the dismantling and offshoring and lawsuits around a major anchor employer called Armstrong. Now, you don't think, when you think of Armstrong, you think of tile, flooring. That's what they do. And I've got 5 minutes already. Okay, I thought I'd be short. You see how that works? What happened with Armstrong is when they started to offshore, when they started to consolidate, when they started to lay off, the folks who were in Lancaster, who were artists designing tile, they stayed. And they created an arts district and independent art studios that were littered all through the city. And we have some anchor organizations. That actually started what we now know as Gallery Row, and it's been a really good thing long term for the community, because I think we're very diverse and we have that arts element side by side with Amish. Mr. Betancourt's here from Community First Fund. When we, and I'll ask you to talk a little later, I'm going to run out of time, but we funded, through our AHA initiative, we funded Community First Fund to grab some new market tax credits. We talked to Dan, and Dan said, look, we think we can get these, but if you help us, as the first dollars in, build the capacity to get new market tax credits, we could have this could have huge impact on our city. But there's a chance it's not going to work. Most funders would say, well, we're going to wait, we're going to hold off, you get that designation and we'll help you out then. We provided the venture capital for that initiative. About a year ago, they were awarded $15 million in federal new market tax credit money that's going to benefit the region. One of the programs that they're benefiting in Lancaster, south of King, in an area that's really challenged in our city, is the Spanish American Civic Association's Tech Centro. It's a Spanish language technical development program that we were an anchor funder in as well, separately from the new market tax credits. So the AHA initiative, really putting dollars out there from a community foundation, philanthropic dollars that are risk capital, is allowing something that I think really has to happen if we want to be successful in economic development. And that is fundamental to economic development strategy is a talent strategy. How are we developing our talent? How are we attracting talent? And that fundamentally, when you bring the talent to a community, economic development happens basically from there. Let me just look and see. I wanted to say Pittsburgh, my son lives in Pittsburgh and South Side, spent some time in Oakland. It's a beautiful city. Baltimore, same thing. The idea that the various districts down in Baltimore are very close to my home, and spent a lot of time there as well. As we talked on the phone, I thought, again, Lancaster is so different than Baltimore and Pittsburgh. But when we talked about economic development and the challenges we face and the fact that certain areas of the city grow and other areas seem to struggle, it's exactly the same. It's on a smaller scale. Maybe it's a digit or two as far as the investment required to change, but the same issues that happen there in Baltimore and in Pittsburgh are happening in Lancaster as well. As a funder, I hope I can provide a little more perspective as we do this from a philanthropic standpoint. And with that, I'll just take my leave.
Okay, as I promised, to the degree that I can make it, I am going to turn this session into an unsession. And I am going to come to you all to moderate a discussion. But first, I'm going to use my prerogative as moderator to ask the question that I'm going to be asking you in a moment, so you can start to think about your answer. I'm going to pose this question to our speakers, and that is, so what are 2 to 3 ideas that you've heard today that you could be moved, or that could be moved to action in your community? So we've had the good fortune of hearing about 3 great stories, and from your colleagues on the dais, what information did they share that have inspired you to take back home with you into your respective communities? And I'm going to ask the same question to you in a moment, and I have the microphone up here. I will be walking around. If you would like to take part in the discussion, please raise your hand, and I'll come over to you, and we'll work it that way. So there is no microphone in the center of the room. I asked them to remove it and hand it to me. So please, kick it off for us. Well, you have a microphone in front of you, so
So 2 to 3, there's one. Thank you. So I think one of the issues that we're dealing with that was mentioned in the Pittsburgh area is the use of technology and the divide. So we have probably in our city, there's a substantial population that doesn't have access to technology, either because of cost or because of where they live, or because of, well, I'll just say it, because of age. And there's that differentiation. And I think to be able to bridge that divide but not make that be the be-all to end-all, like how do you blend that so that in a school that serves 90+% free and reduced lunch, kids, you have the families, that technology becomes part of it, but doesn't become a divisive factor for somebody who has one piece of technology and somebody who doesn't. And I'm not sure what the answer of that is. Technology is here. We need to use it. We need to employ it. We're working on some fronts, but I don't know if I've fully felt comfortable. That's one. And the other that was touched on is how capital or real estate development projects move forward. Is it's easy to put up, as I did, a slide that looks great, but how do you incorporate everything from local hiring to have it become an asset to the community that is, to oversimplify, that it's not just a blank wall, but that helps move economic development in a strategic way that's more than just that particular piece of property. Those are two things that came up for me.
I have one that, and today, I mean, just hearing some of the stuff that Salem was talking about that he's doing with his university, it would be wonderful. I know it's one thing that a lot of my business owners will love to see is sort of more purchasing, sort of the purchasing from the eds and meds in their local economy. The customers obviously come from the eds and meds, but, you know, getting the institutions to dedicate, I know there's a hospital system in Cleveland, for example, that made it a point to purchase 10% of their purchasing to be done within the actual community that they're housing. That's pretty big, and that's the kind of thing that business owners like to hear. So that's something wonderful that we heard today. And then just the second thing is that I heard yesterday was this concept of shared value. You know, as we continue to succeed and we're bringing these new office technology companies into our district, and the goal really is 100. We're about a fifth of the way there. This concept of, you know, how do you promote societal values, community values in your business model while you're doing business, not just do what it takes to make your profit and then give back. And so it was a wonderful to hear yesterday this sort of new concept of, no, new century, new way of doing business. And so, you know, these are the new entrepreneurs, so I'm looking forward to finding ways to incorporate that.
Well, I think if you just listen to the context from which you're hearing from Baltimore and from Pittsburgh, the idea of having your eds and meds involved, every community. LGH, Lancaster General Hospital, is kind of our anchor health institution. They're our largest employer. At this point, I think in history, in almost every community, engaging that employer, engaging the healthcare system in whatever you're doing as far as economic development, I think is vital. And so the partnership between LGH connecting with F&M and some of our other, Franklin and Marshall College, some of our other anchor, and the city, has really been pivotal for us. Without the health system at the table, I don't believe Lancaster's where it is today. So I think engaging those key anchor institutions is critical.
So there are, I'm sure, numerous stories out there. We've heard about 2 stories from a foundation and anchor districts. But I now am going to come to you. I know of firsthand at least 10 examples of new partnerships that have emerged in the past 3 years, whether it be community developers partnering with workforce developers in this new reality to deal with issues in their backyard, economic developers partnering with community developers and the like. So now I am coming back to you, and I see hand first, and then the second, and then I'll come back up this way. So please.
Thanks. I'm Jeff Hornstein with the City Controller's Office here in Philadelphia. I'm always inspired when I hear Pittsburgh, and Baltimore, and Cleveland, because you guys have done or started to do an anchor strategy that sort of picks up where Penn, in a way, left off. Not to disparage them at all, because they've done amazing things. I was a bouncer at Smokey Joe's.
That's where I know you from.
In 1990, and part of the job was walking students home after the bar closed. And now there's a Jose Garces restaurant across the street, which tells you everything you need to know about how successful Penn's real estate strategy was. We have 25 bids in this city. The biggest one's right here. One of the reasons why this is, it has a $20 million budget. It's one of the reasons why this is the densest and largest residential downtown in the country outside of New York. But we haven't seized, in my view, on the biggest opportunity we have. 22 universities in the city itself, 100,000 students, 22 hospitals, $14 billion operating budget combined, $5.3 billion in procurement. And to speak to Georgia Petropoulos' point, we're doing an analysis right now to try and spark a localizing of procurement here in town. Because Penn, which is the leader, does about 12 to 15% local procurement. No one else comes close. And part of that is not their fault. They want to do it. But how do we incentivize the creation, attraction, retention of local firms to feed that anchor demand? Sort of an import substitution model on the hyper-local level. That would be my first question. Has anyone had experience with that? And even wondering if Hopkins has. I used to live across the street from Hopkins, great place. So we've had like this sort of embarrassment of riches here, but a lack of coordinating leadership and a lack of strategy to get to that procurement. And the second question is, has anyone included the for-profits in their anchor strategies? We have some firms that probably aren't going to leave. You can look out the window and see one of them. It's trying to merge with another big one. Can we get them involved? Can we get them to start looking at the shared value proposition of supporting education, supporting transit, that sort of thing? So I'd be curious to hear answers to that.
So before you answer that question, let me press you, Jeff. What are the top 2 things that you want to take back from what you've heard right now to implement here? I heard essentially the procurement, and if you could rank those, that would be helpful.
Well, the coordinating, getting all the people around the same table. That's the key thing. I mean, you seem to be doing that in Oakland. We have University City District. It's a small piece of our city. How do you herd the cats? I mean, that's the thing we're trying to really wrestle with here, is herding the cats. That's what I'd like to take back.
Thank you. And sorry to press you on that. I just want to make sure we got you on record. So, please, any ideas to Jeff's question?
In terms of how to herd the cats? Food and wine. That's the way my mother did it, and that's the way I do it. That's the way Rome was built, just so you know, around a dinner table. So, but no, really, personalities play a big role in that, obviously. So, start one by one, find the partners, find one or 2 people who get it, and let them be sort of the person that opens the doors for you throughout the system. As you were saying, you can have a president make the statement, but that doesn't mean you have every leader from every department within every piece of the university and hospital system behind that. So that would be one. I do have a couple examples to share to your question. City of Pittsburgh actually did create an education program called the Pittsburgh Promise, of which UPMC Hospital System is one of the largest investors. So the way it works is, if you are a resident of the city of Pittsburgh and your child has gone through the Pittsburgh Public School system, and if you go on to higher ed, and I believe it may just be state, or I'm not sure, statewide, as long as you remain in Pennsylvania, you will get grants towards each of the year that you will go towards one of the state university programs. And the Pittsburgh Promise will fund that. So it's encouraging city resident kids to go on to higher ed, and of course the goal would be that they go to higher ed in Pittsburgh, but throughout Pennsylvania. And there are also for-profit entities as well as more nonprofits that have contributed towards that. And that's a partnership between the city of Pittsburgh, the school district, and our biggest contributor being our hospital system, UPMC. The second is in Cleveland. I believe, and our partners in Cleveland, you may remember, Joe, they had a co-op that they formed, and I believe it was in partnership with the Cleveland Clinic, where this co-op, which is owned by the employees, they do laundry. One of the biggest products they do, and the hospitals purchase it, is the laundry services. And I think the second one, I think there's a food, lettuce, if I'm not mistaken, that I think the food systems for purchasing.
It was an agricultural.
Funded by the Cleveland Foundation. I mean, fronted it as a concept, and it's been very, very successful. So that's another model.
I'd just also add the cat herding piece is absolutely true, but in addition to wine and beer and food, the other piece is that our model is based really on this business interest. It's nice it's to go to somebody, a private sector, and say, we want to improve this park because it'll look nice, is very different than saying we want to improve this park because it'll improve, property values and the spin-off from there. So I think the part that we've been successful with is understanding what is the core interest of the individual or the business or the other party. Why should they get involved? I mean, sometimes you have somebody who has a civic and philanthropic reason, they live from the area, but whether you're an individual property owner, you're the owner of a large business, you're a politician, what is it that's going to get your attention, and how do you go about providing value added? It's one thing to say, oh, here's the issue that we're going to solve, but if you coming to the table don't have anything to add value to it, you're essentially wasting people's time, to be very blunt about it. So I think it's kind of doing that work up front, and the last thing I'd say on that is prioritizing. There's an infinite number of issues that need to be addressed. It's figuring out very deliberately and strategically what are the priorities for the organization or interest that you're representing, and how do they align, who else is in that pipeline, and how do you get their attention? It's not just, me going and saying, hey, I want to talk to the CEO of a corporation, but it's saying, okay, I'm going to take my leadership's time, or I'm going to talk to City Hall or bring something in. That'll get people's attention about what needs to be done. In terms of local economic inclusion, Penn's done a great job of it, so have other universities. Hopkins is getting, on the university side, we're getting better at it. Again, what I've found is focusing our local purchasing on spending more locally. Hopkins is the demand side. You need to have the supply side. One of the things I found is that Hopkins spends about 75% of its addressable spend, that is money that it has a choice about how to spend, on highly specific scientific-related items. And this isn't to make an excuse, but you can only buy certain types of test tubes, testing equipment, chemicals. There's not a whole lot of that in the neighborhoods around us. So how do we identify what we can purchase locally, and how do we build? And this is really the area that I'm looking at, is how do we build capacity locally? And the university can't and shouldn't do that alone, but how do we bring in the resources to help build those existing businesses?
Sam, anything there?
Just to build on the herding cats, you got to start somewhere. Having a strategy, knowing exactly what you're trying to achieve, and bringing the right partners, the right starting partners. You're not going to start with everybody, so identifying those again anchor partners to the table first is really that's the traction point.
I saw a hand here, and 2 to 3 ideas that you've heard today, or maybe that you haven't heard today, that you'd like to bring back to your community.
Well, I have very specific. Thank you. I'm Bonita Cove. I'm from Lycoming College, which is in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. We are the John Hopkins of our area, I like to think. We're not as big, and Williamsport is not as big. Okay. We just recently have a new president, Dr. Kent Trachty from F&M. Thank you very much. Wonderful president. After 24 years of the same president, he is bringing what he did at F&M to our community. He wants the college to open up, be a player, just like your new president does. What I've learned is he's not unique in this approach. I am currently working on a document that's going to go to the board that's saying we need an office. We need somebody who's going to coordinate all these efforts on the campus. We have a lot of faculty doing individual projects with the community. We have some community members reaching out to us. But how can I convince them you need someone to herd the cats? Otherwise the cats are running around, and you know what cats will do.
Oh, yeah.
So what kind of process works well with, we may just have one person.
Yeah.
We don't have a bid, we don't have CBCs in our town.
So let me try taking a quick pass at that. President Daniels opened the office, was called Economic Development. It's myself and one other person and a administrative assistant who run the office. But the reality is that while we're in the president's office, that helps. Really, there are three legs to the process. There's the Board of Trustees, which the trustees established the first new standing committee in over 13 years to look at off-campus anchor institution engagement. So having the trust, it's absolutely critical. You got to have the president behind you, but having your board of trustees and having the right people on that committee is very helpful. They held the president and others accountable to move the agenda forward. The other piece is, as a university, at least at Hopkins, we can't and shouldn't do everything alone. So we have established relationships throughout the university, but I'd say most importantly is the relationships that we have with off-campus partners, the nonprofits, the private sector, and in government to help carry the agenda forward. Because I will tell you, the university cannot move an agenda forward unless you have off-campus support. So it's selling, it's cajoling, it's being a player, putting resources into the game. As I said earlier, the president put $10 million of cash, which is a lot. But that also forces us, and other commitments, but forces us to be accountable, and the president's office to be accountable, and that's helped move that forward.
Very specific answer from my perspective, and that is that your now president worked for a gentleman named John Fry, who is at Drexel currently. And while you're here, reaching out to John. John was instrumental in Lancaster in creating the James Street Improvement District, which is basically in the area of what you're describing, in partnership with Lancaster General Hospital. But they brought a lot of the community leadership together to really do development in that area of our community, and it's been magnificent. So having Ken reach out to John and learning directly from him is a good idea.
And just use trends. This is the trend, right?
That's true. I didn't know that.
This is a business. It's a business approach, business model, and universities need to catch up and connect with community. And you guarantee there's going to be community leaders around your area, even if it's one or two business owners, even if it's a handful of residents that organize over XYZ issue. There are definitely players who are within the community that could work there, and local government, definitely through your council offices, and take advantage of that as well as partners.
So that's a great segue to a point that I wanted to make sure that I enforced, or excuse me, not enforced, but a great point that I wanted to make sure that I had made at the beginning of the session, and I failed to do so, so I'll make it now. If you hear of other organizations within the room that are doing similar initiatives, or see organizations or people that might be natural partners, reach out to them. After the session, trade cards. One of the great benefits of me setting the session up this way, and the Philadelphia Fed having the foresight to set the session up this way, is that this allows multiple players within the room to make connections. So, trade business cards. Kibitz, talk about the issues in your neighborhood, because 25 states, I think, were represented. I think that was in the comments yesterday. Multiple geographies across the board. The really value add in us coming together is that we have the benefit of being in one space, albeit for just a couple of days, but then you can trade cards and be aware of others. So I have one question here, and then I'll come up to you.
So, Sam, first of all, I've been in a couple sessions like this with you, and you say you're not an economic development official, you're a foundation person. I think it's pretty clear to all of us that the seed capital that you're providing to our community projects are making a difference. So maybe I would just differ with you. I think you're getting this stuff and getting capital out so we can leverage these things. So that's a long way of saying I think you get it, and I think that's what makes you not unique, but I think as a foundation president, and we know Lancaster County Community Foundation was that sleep organization funding bricks and mortar, and not really doing it in native and seed capital for things. So you're right. When an organization comes to you and says, "Hey, we can leverage, for that $300,000, we can leverage maybe $50 million in a 5-year period," it's hard to believe that, and I think it does take that sort of risk capital that you were able to do. So just change the subjects.
Don't change it too far, because I'm still going to press you on the 2 to 3 things that maybe Sam didn't mention that Lancaster needs. And I said Lancaster correct twice now, so I guess...
Salem talked about the aha moment in terms of why colleges get involved. It's easy to talk about F&M with John Fry, what happened there in Lancaster, but there was a moment that I thought is a case study for a catastrophic loss for a capital campaign. And the organization was called PAL. I think it's the Fine Arts Center in Lancaster. They got a very large RCAP. It was a $30 million brand new Fine Arts Center in Lancaster City. And within 2 years in the middle of the recession, they couldn't raise their capital campaign, and it basically went belly up. And so it forced the state college, which was 5 or 10 miles outside the city, Millersville, to come in and buy that center. For the first time, this was a non-engaged state school that they're pushing all their programs in Lancaster City. And so I think that is something that I learned today. What Salem was talking about, that aha moment. And so now we understand F&M is fully in the life of the city. We lost an innovative leader. We think we have a new president there, but it's nice to see a new anchor, if you will, coming into Lancaster City and making that difference.
Thank you. I have one question of you. Be thinking about the resources, too, that you might need to quote unquote herd the cats, those poor cats. But think about the resources. I mean, is it just money? You talked about getting players at the table, but is that enough? So,
Hi, thank you. I'm Tanya Poe from Enterprise. We help build businesses and create jobs in 35 communities across the country. And in the herding cat scenario, I thought about some of the things in my previous life that worked, and I wanted to share them. Prior to joining Enterprise in February, I worked for Columbia University as their executive director of construction business services. And my job was literally to find businesses that had capacity to bring to the university that were minority, women, or locally owned, that could help us reach our BHAG goals, our big, hairy, audacious goals of 35% contracting with local MWBEs and 40% workforce.
Wow.
Not small numbers. And we had a lot of great success. A lot of it was about building partnerships, but some of it was a little bit unconventional in a university environment. Part of it was the reporting that I did school by school. It's also equal to public shaming. You're not achieving, your colleagues are. This is what they're doing. What are you doing? You know. Department chairs are very competitive, so that helped a lot. A lot of people called me, well, what can we do? Some of it was really finding the low-hanging fruit. We found that our business school purchased tens, well, not tens of millions, I don't know the exact number, but certainly millions of dollars in flowers and catering throughout the year. And we were in an area that had the highest density of new restaurants opening. That's just a clear match right there. The other was using unused assets. We found that we had a dormant kitchen in the theological college. We then created a food incubator for small businesses. So some of it's not lots of money. Some of it's just thinking through what's happening everywhere throughout the college. And because they're so decentralized, you don't always know what the assets are that are there that can be resourced. The other thing I wanted to talk about were the business investment or the business improvement districts in New York City. You know, there are over 40 of them.
65.
Right.
Yep.
At this count. One of the things that they used very strategically was lighting. And I was so impressed. A woman-owned company came in and would literally give night walk tours through the bids to show them what they could and couldn't do at very moderate cost to improve lighting. It helped with the safety issues. It kept more people out shopping longer when you have better lighting, and just so many benefits from that one issue. So that's what I wanted.
So I'm interested in just a show of hands. How many communities that you all represent have local procurement policies or examples of local procurement policies? I mean, how widespread is it that the anchors are trying to buy local, if you will? So that was that was a Spartan attempt at getting a count. Real quick. So 10 to 11, it looks like, at least. And I think that that's an interesting conversation to be had, and it makes some connections between the community and the anchors that might traditionally not have had those connections. I have one question over here, and then.
Good morning, Phyllis Alexander, City of Allentown, Pennsylvania. And Allentown is going through an unprecedented amount of economic development. And something I've heard that I'm going to take back is to pose the question, how do we, and the economic development is going on surrounded by a community that is low income, high crime. So we've got all this development, but the community surrounding it is falling apart. So something I've heard that I want to take back is, how do we increase middle income, mixed income, this is what I heard you say, Salem, while at the same time not displacing the residents that currently live there. So I'd love to hear more, and if there's something you have in writing, I'll take it. That's the issue.
Sure. So in writing, there's the HCPI report, which can be found. There's a description. We very deliberately and openly talk about the challenges to make sure that we're not displacing low-income people, renters, businesses that may be struggling. So you can find it if you go to jhu.edu and just search for HCPI. That'll bring up that, and there's a long discussion about that. But in summary, we're looking at several different points. One is there's a large amount of housing that's available, so we're fortunate/unfortunate that the housing market lends itself. We are bringing in more people, and in some neighborhoods, housing prices are increasing, but we're not at the point where we're creating displacement. We're also working very consciously. We're fortunate, again, because we're able to be proactive here about this, that we can take very deliberate steps to make sure that displacement doesn't happen, or I should say as much as possible, by deliberate strategies, working with our city leadership, with the nonprofits. We work with many of the developers that are involved, and developing the programs to move the agenda forward. So we're conscious about it. In the schools, while the neighborhoods have actually asked for more market rate housing, because there's an understanding that when you have more market rate housing, generally safety and security improve. You bring more retail, the schools improve, all the indicators. So we're moving forward with that in mind. And in the schools, it's about both schools have about 90, maybe over, free and reduced lunch. So we're making sure that the programming that goes in there the academic programming is oriented towards supporting households that are coming from challenging backgrounds, but also lifting the ladder so that it's not no child left behind, but it's about how can we elevate the process so where you have opportunities to move forward, we're able to put that type of programming in place. And then the final piece is looking at how do we make sure that people who are in the neighborhood have opportunities to move into housing. So the artists, there's housing is specifically developed with artist income and rents in mind. How do we keep housing that's serving lower income persons from being scooped up by investors and developers, and keeping that in place? So it's a series you'll see. You can read it in the report. Eventually it'll be a YouTube video or something.
Yeah. If I can just add, we haven't developed it yet in Pittsburgh, but my partner organization, which is a CDC, a Community Development Corporation, is trying to get the hospitals and the universities to sign on to an employee incentive program where they incentivize their employees to own homes in the surrounding community. Again, they haven't agreed to it in Pittsburgh, but there are model universities, there might even be some in this room, where that does exist. That's one. Two, the university actually did partner with the CDC in a long-term plan, because my business district is surrounded by, excuse the expression, a student ghetto, right? You have property owners that just hold these properties. They know they can get the student. The student's going to pay the highest price tag because they want to be able to roll out of bed and get to class. And they get a high price tag, and you'd be amazed what they get a high price tag for. So the university actually created a strategy where they made it a point to build more student housing so they can actually help adjust that market. It's going to take a while. We're starting to see some of the differences, but the university became a player and said, as we build more housing, that's going to help your goal to try and eliminate transient users and bring in more permanent users. So,
and Lancaster General actually has a housing partnership developed that you just mentioned, so they're an example. We actually funded a group called Lancaster Housing Opportunity Partnership. They've partnered with our local builders association, our school district, basically securing 2 anchor properties in 2 very challenging neighborhoods, with the belief that when we invest, if we can bring those homes up to a standard that's a high standard, not bring them in under market rate initially, so the Housing Opportunity Partnership has identified homeowners that they'll bring in, permanent homeowners, and the idea is that will attract other investors. It'll elevate the neighborhood overall. And neighborhood development is really done one house, one block at a time, looking at it very, very kind of inside out, and the Housing Opportunity Partnership is approaching it that way.
Thank you. So we are nearing the end of this session, and I see we have about 5 or 6 minutes left. So let me ask one more question. I'm going to turn it over to this patient woman in the corner following my question. But what research and I wouldn't be a good Federal Reserve community development employee if I didn't pose this question. What research is needed to help move the needle on these issues? What will you need in your community? I mean, how could we start that resource discussion on the research side? So let me hand this over. Keep thinking about that, and we will get to a couple of research wish lists, if you will, before we end.
Jean Horstman and Interrise. We were funded by CERTA a couple of years ago to look at both the supply and the demand side around procurement by anchors, and particularly local procurement. We used a systems thinking model and discovered that on the supply side, it's a training and development question. On the demand side, the restraint in the system was really perceptional. And it was this sense that even if there were businesses we could do business with, but we're not really sure they're up to the task. And so what we've been doing for 2 years is working with, on the demand side, and putting together a team of procurement officers at a university to work with us to develop the tools and practices that we can use to develop the small businesses they want to do business with. By part of the team they're working with are businesses that already do business with anchor institutions. So the perception that they're not businesses out there that we can trust is addressed by working alongside and co-creating something to address the larger problem. What we've realized is you can't focus just on let's create a supply chain for our university, but rather you have to think about the university as an investor in the small business development ecosystem, that making it possible for businesses that aren't yet ready to do business with the university to also grow because they do business with other businesses. So as we think about this more complex, this question about how do we do local procurement, it's not as simple as find a business and give them a contract. It's actually an ecosystem approach. One of the interesting things the University of Chicago has been doing, which many people know, is they actually move the burden to their prime contractors. And they expect the prime contractor to use a percentage of that contract hiring locally, but they also expect those businesses to be successful at being a subcontractor. So I think when we think about this, if we can move into more of a web way of thinking about a web of relationships and not just a linear relationship, there's a lot more leverage for both the community as well as the anchors.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I need to change the discussion to the research question. If you have a wish list on the research, that would be great.
Actually, I'm actually satisfying both questions. My name is Chris Waters. I'm from the Urban Threat Coalition. We actually recently did a study. We have an employer hospitality program, and we actually helped 23 of our employers in the city of Philadelphia help their employees buy houses in the city of Philadelphia. So on the research side, recently, this program has been around for 10 years. We actually started doing what have the employees themselves been doing with houses. And the one thing that we have been focusing on is neighborhood stabilization. And what we have figured out is that 91% of the houses purchased through our program are still owned by the original house, the grantees that earn the employer's money and our money for a matching program. So when it comes to neighborhood stabilization. So I think when it comes to research, the one thing that we always have to look at is make sure that the data is more than 5 years old. Make sure that the data is consistent. A lot of times what happens is that as programs evolve, the things that are required for the reporting for that data, depending on the funder, keeps on changing. Whether they're an anchor institution, or whether they're an individual organization, or whether they're a foundation, it always changes as a tide. So the one thing I would say, and one thing that we work with our contractors and our consultants with, is that whenever an employee buys a house, whenever an employee applies for our program and you get funds to, make sure that we get all the consistent information. So when you have to go back and do research, the information is always consistent and it isn't always, let's say, wonky. So someone wants this, someone wants that. But when you have to look at the constant information throughout the years, it's always going to be consistent.
That was a perfect segue. I see my 1-minute card waving in the background, but I would be remiss if I didn't say to everyone in the room, reach out to your local Federal Reserve districts, staff, employees, especially on the community development side, research side. They are a wealth of knowledge. They have a lot of resources. They do engage regularly in research and can help set up oftentimes on the technical assistance side ways to answer your questions and needs and have that discussion. The other thing I want to make sure is a point that I made earlier that I hit on. We met a lot of folks in our discussion today in the room that are working on similarly focused issues. Reach out to them either at the end of this session or if you happen to catch them in the hallway following this session, during the conference. Exchange the business cards. I know it usually goes without saying, but I'm explicitly saying this. We wanted folks to really be able to engage in that knowledge sharing, and that's why we set the session up the way that we did. And then last but certainly not least, I want to thank our panelists. And a special thanks from me. So I believe the next session is a plenary, and it's downstairs, so enjoy.